And I've got an agency that said, hey, we haven't done a verbal out. We've taken the dog off out of our last 100 bites almost like 100 times. And another city within that area is at like, we're 60% of the time we're verbal outing.
So now while the dog is engaging the suspect and I'm here, do I remove myself and go 30 feet back to find cover to now remove my dog? Or do I deal with my dog here where I have control while the suspect is surrendering?
Welcome to Police K-9 Radio. Rich, what's going on?
Training factions.
Boom. Let's get it on.
Always, never, sometimes. We're going to hit all of those. Lately, there's been a lot of discussion on how dogs should be outed during a deployment. Mm-hmm. And there seems to be groups that fall into the always, never camps. Always go up to the dog, get physical contact with the dog, out the dog while having positive control. Or never go up and touch the dog, always out the dog to cover. Dog's at the suspect, you tell the dog to out, that dog comes back to you, we aren't touching the suspect. And then camp 3 falls in the middle of that. Sometimes we go hands-on, sometimes we do a verbal out to cover.
Yeah. And full disclosure, we're kind of camp 3. However, I want to present the argument on the extremes as well, because they're out there and we're kind of divided as a community. And I know this has been a hot topic and something we're going to address today.
And I think so we can kind of have a foundation of where this conversation is coming from. Not going to use the word fear. There's a concern with case law due to the conversation about time on bite. And I think the time on bite conversation is what is propelling everybody towards having to make a decision one way or the other. Also, officer safety. Yeah. So those two things seem to be really what's propelling this conversation to go in different directions, time on bite and officer safety.
Yeah, and before we go any further, let's define some terms here. So we've got the verbal release from a distance. So that's basically you're staying back anywhere from 2 feet to 50 feet, and you're doing a verbal out, and you're recalling the dog back to you. So that'll be a verbal out from a distance. And then there's also the verbal out with positive control, which means you're going up, you're physically grabbing the dog's collar or equipment on the dog, you're commanding the dog to release, he lets go, you're pulling him back.
You're not using the collar that you're grabbing to get the release. That's just to have control when the dog does let go.
Correct. Okay. So, and that's what we train. Now, subsequently, if the dog isn't obedient to the command, the out command, then the handler has the option to use a breaker bar or a lift off or something like that. But we are not advocating in that situation that you do not train a verbal out. So I think we can both agree that a verbal out is absolutely necessary to train. Not only are you required to do it for most certifications, but that's what we do. We train the dog to let go. We're not relying on taking the dog's air or another device to put in the dog's mouth or have to use the e-collar. And I'm not saying we don't use those as contingency outs, but for the purpose of this discussion, grabbing the dog's collar and asking the dog to out is a verbal out with positive control.
I think the other thing that affects this conversation is the amount of support you have as a canine handler, meaning the people around you. And we're going to talk about this because I think you specifically, you train several agencies. Some of them are in very urban areas where it's just concrete and buildings and a whole lot of cops there to support the canine doing its job. You also work with agencies that are very rural and might have 2 people on a shift at a given shift, and one of them is a canine handler and the other one is their cover. Those deployment models are different. Mm-hmm. And so if in one situation I send my dog and he bites somebody 20 yards away from me and that person says, I give up, and I have 6 to 8 surrounding cover officers and lethal cover, non-lethal, handcuffing team. I have everything available to me. That same bite now moved into a rural area with 2 cops. The dog's 50 yards away from me, makes contact. I might treat that different just because I have less support.
Yeah, I think geography and number of cover officers can definitely dictate maybe what method you're leaning towards. But we have agencies that work in the same county, and some county and city work in the same environment, right? And we did a little poll before this podcast, and we have some agencies that in the last 7 years have had 350 bites, physical apprehensions, and have done 8 verbal outs from a distance out of that 350. And actually, if you add up 3 agencies that we're associated with, you could have 550 physical apprehensions, and out of that, there have been the same 8 total verbal outs from a distance. And then we have other agencies that have elected to go more the verbal out from a distance tactic, and they are running about 60% of their outs have been verbal outs from a distance. 30 to 40% have been grabbing the dog, which equates to 100 bites for that agency. 60 have been verbal outs from a distance. So, like, we're all over the map, right? And I've got an agency that said, hey, we haven't done a verbal out. We've taken the dog off out of our last 100 bites almost like 100 times. And another city within that area is at like, we're 60% of the time we're verbal outing from a distance.
Why?
That's what we're going to discuss.
Why? I mean, it's one, it has to be, somebody has to be leading the charge on, I want your outs to look like this or to look like this.
Yeah.
So it starts with leadership somewhere. And we talked about this before. I don't think any camp is wrong. Like you said, we fall in the middle.
There's pros and cons.
Yeah.
There's pros and cons to both.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're an either or, always, never. We're the situation's going to dictate, and we're going to talk about some of those situations.
And I was talking to you, and I'm anecdotally for me, I ran 3 dogs. Mm-hmm. Maybe like a busy year was 20 bites. Didn't work in an overly busy agency. 20 bites in a year would have been a lot, more likely 10, right? 3 times that I can think of where I had to use a verbal out. One, I was in an attic, dog engaged.
From a distance.
From a distance.
Okay.
Dog was across the house in the attic. I'm trying to make my way to the dog. Dog makes contact. Suspect gives up. I couldn't get to the suspect quick enough to be reasonable with the amount of force that the dog was using. I outed the dog, brought the dog back to me. At that point, I also had a foot through the living room ceiling, kind of dangling over the top of a ceiling fan. Everything wasn't amazing, so I needed to get the dog back. It was clear to me that the suspect was done, didn't want to play anymore. And then at that point, brought the dog back. Cover officers were up in the attic with me, ordered him out, did what we needed to do. Second one was on the bottom side of the house. Dog went in, made contact with the suspect, was biting the suspect. Suspect gave up. I couldn't get to the dog fast enough. It had to be a low crawl in this crawl space to get to the dog. Couldn't get to the dog fast enough. And the dog had wrapped itself up in cable wire. So had to out the dog. And then I actually had to walk the suspect through taking the harness off of the dog while the dog was laying there doing great. Very happy with that situation. And then got a verbal out on the dog, and we had lights on the guy, and were able to get him out from underneath the house in the crawl space. Third one was the dog jumped off of a ravine into a creek bed, was biting the suspect. For me to go down there was going to be a definite injury. He was injured, was hiding the dog, like, hey, I'm done. Oh, I think I broke my leg also. Verbal out of the dog. The dog came back. We ended up having to get medics and everybody else down there and do essentially a medical evacuation. All 3 required a verbal out. The rest of mine were all hands-on with the suspect, fighting with somebody, chasing somebody fleeing with somebody. The dog caught them, and I was there with the suspect and the dog, and I needed to physically remove the dog because going back to cover would have added to time on bite and loss of control. Hey, we'd like to welcome our new sponsor and old friend, Blackjack's Leather. Blackjack's is the true definition of a mom and pop shop. They're out in Illinois. Richard, the owner, is somebody that we work extensively with. They make leather leashes, leather collars, Biothane, we get a ton of biothane from them. Biothane 3 foot, 6 foot, 20 foot, 30 foot leashes, all kinds of colors. I know everybody that's listening to the podcast is into the tactical with the greens and the coyotes and the blacks. But if you have a pet dog at home and you want your dog to be a little flashy, we love their long line biothane leashes. There's blues, there's pinks, there's oranges, yellows, all kinds of colors. Add a little flash to your program. And they really care about canine handlers. They're big on making sure that the equipment that they sell is safe for the dog and safe for the handler, and exactly what you're asking for. Blackjack's Leather, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you.
So, and there are certain circumstances I think we can pretty much all agree on where we're going to need a verbal out, and this is what we train for. I think you hit one of them, subterranean. Under a house, you can't get to the dog safely. Attic, another one, depending on where your cover is, the environment where the suspect's put himself, another option for a verbal out from a distance. You bite the wrong person and they're at a distance and you want that dog off right this second, and and actually these are all scenarios in which we talked about the 550 bites with the 8 verbal outs from a distance. These were all the scenarios that were wrapped up into that. Biting the wrong person, outing, and then redirecting to the suspect. Tight spaces where a suspect is, your dog is searching, all of a sudden he goes in between 2 fences and the suspects put themselves in a compromised position where they're just jammed in there and you're like, there's no way I can get to him or my dog without ripping these fences apart. Verbal out and recall. Another one was under the car, where the dog went under the car, bit the suspect, and he decided to go ahead and verbal out from there, unable to get to the dog. It was dark. Guy was like tucked up into the car. So another option there. So, and again, it's something we train. Every training, we do a verbal out and we do a call off. Rich, I know you were active in doing trials, as I was back in the day. We did very well. I saw you take home a number of first places. I had Top Dog 2013, 2014. Sounds like a long time ago. So it's something that we train every training for these type situations. We leave the tactics up to the handler when they're gonna actually do a verbal recall. So I think it's important for every police dog to have that. So we're not advocating that every release is we're always grabbing the dog. But having said that, I would say 95% of the time our agencies are growing up and they're taking positive control and they're commanding the dog to out.
Yeah, and I think and we talked about this. I think the main reason for that is take the dog out of the picture, and as a police officer or deputy, think in your mind how many times you have the opportunity to arrest somebody in a given year, and how many times do we start and make the arrest from cover? Pretty rare, right? It's rare that hey, I'm going to stand behind this wall, you over there, I need you to come to me, and when you get to me, we're going to handcuff you. That's a good day. Usually it's we're fighting somebody, we're chasing somebody, we're kicking a door, we're searching a building, all without the dog. We find the suspect in the dryer, behind a wall, in a cabinet. We chase him down around a corner, we tackle him, we put handcuffs on him. We're breaking 2 people up that are fighting. We get this guy, we put handcuffs on him. Most of the arrests that we make are physical arrests that are made at the suspect. Now enter the dog. It doesn't change much. We just have another tool. Still, most frequently, the arrest is made at the suspect, meaning he ran from the car, he hid in the building, he was fighting here, and then the dog got on the bite, and I'm there with the dog more often than not. So now while the dog is engaging the suspect and I'm here, do I remove myself and go 30 feet back to find cover to now remove my dog? Or do I deal with my dog here where I have control while the suspect is surrendering?
Yeah.
If they're surrendering.
Well, and I, in speaking with one of the agencies that primarily relies on verbal outs from a distance, the big factor that they brought up was time on bite. And they said that, and you know, we've done a podcast on Rosenbaum and Rock v. Miller, and I want to make sure everybody understands that those were interlocutory decisions, and so which simply means that they have to take the testimony of the suspect that's suing the agency, take the testimony of the suspect, and the facts have not been ironed out in court. So it's like a preliminary decision on denying qualified immunity to those officers, but And in speaking to some attorneys that are very familiar with the case, they're pretty confident that they're going to, once it goes to trial, that they're going to be successful in overcoming that, that motion to deny the qualified immunity. So
On Rosenbaum.
And so, let's not get ahead of ourselves, right? I'll go ahead and make the argument, and let's do this. I want you to make the argument on a verbal out from a distance, and I'll make the argument on taking the dog off with positive control.
Sure.
So we could even use Rosenbaum as a similar situation with Rosenbaum, where the dog goes up the steps, goes on the suspect, and he's biting the suspect. Okay.
So you have the suspect at the top of the stairs. I'm at the bottom of the stairs. The dog goes up. The dog is on the bite. I hear the suspect say, the dog's got me. I give up. So for me, the quickest thing to do is verbally out the dog. I want to bring the dog back to me. My dog has already done its job. He's used his nose, its eyes. He's found the suspect, located the suspect for me, engaged the suspect. The suspect says, hey, I give up. So I know I've won the game at this point. I get the dog back to me. So now we can develop a plan to go up the stairs with humans to make contact with the suspect and take him into custody. Dog's job here is done.
Okay. All right. That's Police Canine Radio. Thanks for listening. No. Okay, so the counter argument to that, right, is there's a reason we're using the dog in the first place. It's we believe this person, we have information that he's armed, or we believed he's armed, we believe he's dangerous. The courts have been pretty clear on when we have to release our dogs from the bite, and that's when we have two things, compliance and control. So the debate here is, so when the dog goes up on the bite and you can see the suspect's hands, he's getting bit, we may have compliance at that point. The real issue is, do we have control? So again, we felt that this was a dangerous enough individual that we've used the dog to help bring this to a peaceful resolution. So the dog is on the bite, and now we're having the dog verbally release and come back to us. And if I believe he's still potentially armed, I'm now giving him the opportunity to further arm himself, or to use whatever he's going to use if he has a weapon, or potentially flee deeper into the house, right? The unsearched rooms. So by pushing up and taking those extra few seconds to actually get control, and now controlling the dog, because and here's one of the things we found with the agencies that do the verbal release from a different distance. Man, you better make sure your cover officers are dialed in, because in that situation in Rosenbaum, the dog, to get back to the handler, would have had to wrestle his way through, I think, 3 or 4 other operators that are up front from the handler. So you have the potential for a re-engagement or, biting a cover officer. And I know that the other group would say, well, then you're not properly training the dog, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, we work in the real world, so that is an option. You're putting that on the table. It's a possibility for re-engagement. But I would argue that we don't have control of that suspect until we push up and we get into a little bit better position where we can actually grab that arm or an appendage and then have the dog release. Hey, I'd like to thank one of our sponsors, Ray Allen Manufacturing. They've been engineering tactical and working dog equipment like harnesses, collars, leashes for military, police for over 75 years. They are continuously innovating. I always like to say, this is not your dad's Ray Allen. They are always looking for the bigger and the better. We get all of our handlers now in the basic handler course deal directly with Ray Allen. We get our harnesses, leashes, tugs, e-collars, gloves, Rec Specs, Hearing Dog Pro. All of our good stuff comes from Ray Allen Manufacturing. Look them up, rayallen.com. I cannot recommend them enough. We only recommend people that we deal with, and these are good people, and they're in it for the right reasons. So because of that, rayallen.com.
Yeah, and in Rosenbaum, I mean, we've seen the video at the top of the stairs. It wasn't just a landing. It was immediate access to rooms that were unsearched. No control over those. And I know I'm arguing off of my point now, but no, those rooms haven't been searched. There was a portion of his person that wasn't visible from the bottom of the stairs. So we could see that his hands were there, and we could see that the dog was there, but I couldn't see what was in his pant legs, any of that stuff, right? So and that's the argument, is at what point is there control? And I think that's where this gray area comes into place, where it's like, in that situation, 100% of the time, we're going to recall the dog to the bottom of the stairs and then send humans up there to solve the problem. Whereas we leave the dog there for seconds, bring the team up there to take control of the suspect. I think we would both argue that that's a safer deployment and still legally acceptable.
Yes. Because again, we're talking, and this was just, man, this was quick. This was me reaching out to 3 or 4 of our agencies, and we've accumulated, 500 physical apprehensions in the last number of years. We're not losing in court on these cases, right? Like, if you want to multiply that out over the country and through the states and stuff like that, I mean, we're looking at thousands of deployments. So I feel like sometimes as an industry, and this is not just canine, is we tend to do this knee-jerk reaction, right? Like, oh, there's this interlocutory decision. From now on, we're changing policy. We're scrapping dogs. The dog goes on the bite, out here. As soon as the dog goes on the bite and you do not have control and you might not even have compliance, but we're so in our heads about the courts that, it's what makes your guys' job tough.
Yeah, and I would say, and we don't have to get into specifics, but I would say that across the country, there are large agencies that sometimes, whether it's their desire to or not, sometimes dictate practices for the rest of the agencies in the region. There's a very large agency in California that deploys where 100% of the goal is for their outs to always come back to cover, to not have to touch the dog, to not have to be physical with the dog. They're a big agency with a lot of influence. The other thing that they have is when they deploy, they have a group of cover officers in a deployment that are canine handlers, work around the dog, like they get to travel with their own pack of handlers.
Like a mini SWAT team.
Yeah, that are very familiar with the dogs, very familiar with the tactics, work together for a long time. They know exactly what the dog's going to do. They know the expectations. And even in that situation, we've seen this go awry where a dog has been on a bite. The dog was outed to cover. The suspect got up and ran, made it into another backyard, made it somewhere else. And then they had to redeploy that again because numbers-wise, they had control, but there was no physical control, and the suspect knew that and got up and fled.
Yeah, and we've seen that within our own group. We've had handlers by themselves where the dog goes on the bite, they verbal out, suspect takes off running. I can think of at least 2 occasions where that's occurred. But to your point, Rich, and in speaking with the agency that does verbal outs primarily from a distance, their cover officers, they're a very busy agency, and their cover officers have a lot of experience, and they've drilled home that they don't become the most interesting thing out there by yelling and pushing forward when the dog is coming back to kind of negate some of that re-engagement. As a realist, I would say we got agencies out there that they may get 3 or 4 bites in a career. Their cover may be very inexperienced. We're seeing that more and more and more on the street, and it's not an excuse, but it's a reality that these guys, when something critical like this happens, they're excited. I mean, how many times, even in your career back, where there's one suspect and everybody was yelling commands, right? And everybody's like, get on the ground, let me see your hands,
Dogs.
And so no different than their dogs on the bite, you're verbal releasing, and they're just continuing to yell commands. And so it's really important for the agencies that do the verbal out from a distance that, number one, your cover officers are very well trained to maintain their position. And number 2, all verbal commands and everything comes from the canine handler.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, we've seen it, whether it be on traffic stops or any of these, high risk. If this person over here is yelling and screaming, the dog might know what a uniform is. It might have some experience and all that. But once the yelling and screaming starts, that all takes the dog's attention. So whoever's the loudest is now most likely to be the next target. Not to say that that can't be controlled, and I want to make sure that we cover all this. We understand the necessity for having good control with a dog. We understand that when I say, Fido, let go and come here, that needs to happen. But it's also important to understand that there's things that interrupt that. Young, loud cops interrupt that. Chaos interrupts it. Outside agencies that don't understand how you work with your dog interrupts that. Like we were talking about that large agency in California, they get to travel with their own group all the time. So they have control of that. The agency that you talked to, he specifically said, when we're working with our own group, we're really successful at this. When we do outside assists, it starts to go awry because the other teams don't understand how to work. And then the dog like, wait a minute, this isn't normal. Why are you yelling? And then the dog changes its mentality because that's not how it goes in training and their other 90% of their deployments. So you have to be dialed in. Now we're talking about an era where you can go to a police department and find somebody who's an FTO who has less than 2 years on as a police officer. So everything's changing. We don't have the joy of having like, hey, canine guy, how long were you a cop before you got a canine? Oh, I put in 12 years before I got before they gave me a dog. I put in 1.5 years. I just got off probation and they gave me a dog, or SWAT or any of those things. So we're losing some of that continuity that we've had in years gone by. So that changes how we deploy with dogs. Has to.
Yeah.
And control. And I think that's the biggest thing. And you and I were talking about that. I think we have to really determine what control is. Is control numbers or is control physical control?
Yeah. And up until now, I think that's still getting ironed out, right? Because I think our law enforcement definition is I've got that other arm and I'm releasing the dog and the cuffing's getting taken care of. Once the dog comes off, the courts, right now we're kind of working through it.
Well, and we have different scenarios, right? Like one scenario, the dog's biting somebody in a bush and the guy is naked and the guy is saying, I give up. You're naked. You're giving up. Looks like we have control. I can argue for that. The other one, the guy's at the top of a landing. There's unsearched rooms. We can't see him. He's getting bit and he says, I give up. I don't feel like we have control yet. I can also argue that. So I think we have to use some common sense in it and not just pick a camp. It can't just be 100% verbal recall, and it can't just be 100% we go hands-on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think tactics are going to definitely dictate it. And during this conversation, if you're watching it on YouTube, we're going to overlay just some videos of us doing verbal outs and then from a distance, because again, even if you guys are a primary, we push up and we take positive control and then verbal out the dog. You need to train for those situations. Give your handlers the tools that if they aren't going to choose to do that tactic for whatever reason, and there could be a multiple number of reasons, that they have the ability to do the verbal out from a distance and recall, pass cover, by cover. You can even start now having cover yell as the dog's coming back. We like to do a lot of stuff in muzzle, so we'll push our limits with that in muzzle to find out where the dog's threshold. But it's just like everything else, Rich, right? Like if you were the I never or I always, really the truth lies in between.
Yeah, we can talk about the faults. I'm big on pushing up. I think it's great, and I know you are too. But that's not the time to, get on the phone and call the lieutenant and, hey, can we get a shield out here? And maybe we want some pepper ball too. Yep, he's still getting bit. Okay, and we need one more person. And can we get medics over here? And then we're going to stage. Mm-hmm. If it's a 4-minute process for you to walk up and take your dog off the bite, I'm in the never camp on that, I guess. I mean, that seems like a bit much. Once again, this episode is brought to you by Inukshuk Professional Dog Food. There's only one brand of dog food that we use and recommend. That is Inukshuk Professional Dog Food. Inukshuk was created for working dogs and continues to be the top choice for all working dogs, from hunting dogs to sled dogs, and of course, police canines. Whether it be detection or patrol canines, visit inukshukpro.com, or you can find all of the formulas on chewy.com.
We have a lot of time to prepare for this moment. You know what team you have with you. So already have everybody's assignments. When the dog goes on the bite, that's not when you're going to be handing out assignments, to your point, Rich, and hey, let's glove up now, and we got everybody here, and then wait for the tap, squeeze shoulder, and we push forward. No, if you're going to be the camp that we're going in and taking the dog off physically, again, positive control, verbal out, just you're holding on to the dog. You're going to have to close some distance. All that stuff needs to be taken care of on the front end. And that's really what we got from the courts recently, especially, and what we've integrated in our training is do all that stuff on the front end. Don't wait until the dog is on the bite. And now it's taken us an extra 15 seconds because that time is going to be counted against you.
Yeah, time on bite matters.
Yeah.
We all agree with that. Time on. And I think that's the thought, is that the the camp that typically moves up doesn't care about time on bite. That's bullshit. We do. We greatly care about time on bite. That's why we're like, hey, let's go. Dogs on the bite. Let's make something happen. And we're getting up there, taking control. And this does not mean, and we want to talk about this, does not mean get the guy handcuffed and then take the dog off the bite. No. That's not the case. But it could be. If you're solo in the middle of nowhere and your dog's on the bite.
And we just had a recent one. We're trying to get the deputy in where his dog bit an armed suspect that had the gun still in his waistband. It's on his right side, and the dog had his right arm. And they were able to push up and grab that other arm and take the dog off and cuff and then get the gun out, right? So I think the courts are pretty clear, and hopefully we're all on the same page here. That's a matter of protocol that we cuff and then take the dog off. No, you're going to have to explain that. And there's reasons when you can explain it. You're by yourself, you're going to potentially cuff before you take the dog off as an option, and the courts are pretty generous with us with that.
Yeah, I just think it's important that we all understand like why we do things a certain way. And I think sometimes we get wrapped up in like, hey, every time the dog's on the bite, I need you to go find cover and get the dog back to you. It doesn't work like that in police work. Like, I'm here with a suspect. I was chasing him. I was fighting him. I found him. I'm here. Why am I going to leave this thing when the most control I can get is here? The most control I can get of my dog, the most control I can get of the suspect is at the suspect, because this is where we found ourselves. Why am I going to leave this situation and then verbally out my dog? And if I'm 4 feet away from the dog, and now in my mind, my only option is to verbal out the dog, that leaves a whole lot of opportunity for the dog to start making other decisions.
Sure. Well, and not only that, right? Everybody's focus is on the dog. So now I'm verbally outing. As a handler, my focus is on the dog. And if the suspect is then going to produce a weapon, like, we've given him this window of opportunity versus, and it's big in SWAT, right? We don't want to give up territory that we've already gained. And by doing the verbal release, we've already gained like somewhat of the suspect has to deal with the dog. He's getting bit. And now we're having the dog let go for the suspect to recollect his thoughts, either come back with a gun or run, when it would cost us maybe a couple seconds to actually grab a hold of the suspect or grab a hold of the dog and then, take the suspect into custody. So like everything else, there's a benefit and loss, right? And it's what are we gaining and what are we giving up?
And sometimes I would say a lot of it depends on what the suspect's doing, right? A suspect can be flailing around, screaming, and all of those things. The dog doesn't know what that means. It just looks like an active suspect to him. So if we out the dog too early with lack of control, and the dog is like, this guy's still fighting, then at least that's in the dog's head, right? Like, if I'm 5 feet away from that situation, I'm just going to go up and control the dog so the dog doesn't have to think. Like, nope, I tell you to out, you come with me. And I want to clarify with you, when you're outing a dog, when you're teaching handlers to out a dog, when you're having them get physical control of the dog, you're not using the collar to do a lift off to choke the dog off. You're using the collar as control for the dog.
Correct. And so this is what we train. You grab the collar, you tell the dog to release, he opens his mouth, you push back. You have positive control by either having the dog, maybe even straddling the dog, controlling his head while the handcuffing then takes place. We do teach contingencies. So I think we can all agree, and on both camps, the verbal out from a distance and we're going to take positive control camp, we can all agree that it's cleaner and it looks best if the dog outs on one verbal out. So by me taking hold of the collar and I give my dog the verbal command to out, if that dog does not release, then we're immediately doing a breaker bar, we're immediately overlaying our e-collar at that point, or we're doing a lift-off. So I'm in close proximity to do that, where if I'm doing a verbal release from a distance, I may not have those. All I have is basically my e-collar, and hopefully that works at that point.
And obedience, right?
Obedience.
From your past training.
Yeah. So, I mean, and it's So, and I get the other camp. Well, you know what? If you train the dog properly, well, go ahead and train hundreds, if not thousands of police dogs, and you are going to have dogs that are not always going to perform like you expect them to, or they always have. I always say my dog outed every time verbally until the day he didn't. And usually it's that dog, we're getting these dogs so they They like the confrontation, right? If somebody puts paint on them, they respond with like kind. And now you get a suspect that really fell on top of the dog, or maybe freaking choked the dog, made it personal, punched the dog several times. And now that dog that has always verbal outed up until that moment, going to be a little tougher. Yeah. And so to be up on top of them, being able to get the verbal release and then making it happen, I'm actually, it looks better and so on and so forth, but I'm also protecting that suspect from getting bit further where I may not be able to accomplish that verbal out from the distance.
Yeah, I'm the one that's in control of the situation. And again, if there were no dog here, it would just be me and the suspect. I'm in 90% of these or more, in 90% of these situations, if it required a dog, that means it required more force than I was capable of bringing to the table as just me. But if it were just me, I'd be fighting with the suspect. I'd be tackling the suspect. I'd be chasing the suspect. I'd be finding the suspect. And then now I have to go hands on. As a cop without a dog, I'm not going to remove myself to cover and now go lethal and, hey, you come here, we just had it. I'm not going to do that. So why am I going to do that with a dog? I lose control by creating distance.
Hey, for all you handlers out there, it's really important that we stay in physical condition, but it's also equally, if not more important, that we are good upstairs mentally. And so knowing that you guys have a stressful job, something that we've started doing, all of our trainers doing, and Rich turned me on to this, is sauna box.
Yeah, love it.
And it's to say it's life-changing is not hyperbole. Like, it's one of those things that if you haven't done sauna, I highly recommend it. And I was looking at like, hey, how can I get a sauna? I started looking at pricing them out. Could go up to $10,000 for a nice one. And Rich, you're the one that turned me on to this thing. It's for about $500. You get a sauna that it's steam, and it is not pleasant when you hit about the 20-minute mark if you can hang in there for that long. But when I come out of this thing, man, I feel so much better. I feel decompressed. I feel like I'm a nicer person. Yeah. And it's one of those things that now I do probably 4 to 5 days a week. All of our trainers have them. I'm getting the same feedback. Rich, you have one.
Have it. I really can't live without it at this point. And like you said, it's 20 minutes. It can be in the evening. It can be in the morning, whenever it works best for you. But 20 minutes on the sauna box, and you are gassed by the time you come out of there. But rinse off, get ready to go. Like, man, your body feels better. Your brain feels better. I just feel like I can take more on that day. My sleep is definitely better. I love it, and I use it. Like, I'm with you. I use it 4 or 5 times a week. It's part of my program now, and it's the least invasive part of my program that makes me feel that much better.
Yeah, lots of studies on it. So go to saunabox.com, use keyword K9, K the number 9, get yourself an extra 10% off. Tell them Rich and Gregg sent you.
Have some fun and sweat it out.
All right. So obviously we're in the camp more of going in and taking positive control. If you are in the other camp, if you are in the camp of like, no, we verbal out from a distance, and this is why, and we haven't covered it to your liking. We haven't done you justice in your argument. Reach out to Rich and I. I'd love to have the discussion. We talked about maybe having a handler or a trainer that is in that other camp to come on, and let's have a roundtable discussion. Guys, we're all in this for the same reason. Rich and I do this podcast to put out information so handlers go home safe. We don't need to be in these separate camps and be so angry with each other and like, F you, you're an idiot because you do it this way. And no, we all have had different experiences, and maybe you can come on here and enlighten us to why you do certain things a certain way. And again, I don't think it's a them and us. I think it's kind of most of us are kind of in the middle.
Well, you and I both talked to an agency today, and we were told that agency is primarily a get cover, we call to cover. When we talked to a handler from that agency, when he explained it to us, it made sense. There were some points where we were like, I don't love that. But what he explained to us is really he's in the middle.
Yeah, he said a third of the time I actually grab the dog and tell him to verbal out if I'm right there.
Yeah. But still using a verbal out.
Verbal out.
Same way we use a verbal out,
yeah.
But at the suspect. And then the rest of the time he was doing it from cover. And when he explained it, and he explained that the experience that the cover officer had and the amount of training that they get, it made more sense. There were times where we're like, I don't love that. There was a guy he talked about that had a gun warrant, and the dog apprehended the guy. He verbal outed. The guy got off and ran. He had to restart the whole process again, bit him again. Guy gave up, pulled the dog back. Guy got up and ran. Had to do that 3 separate times.
Yeah.
Not the norm, but enough where we're like, man, guy with a gun warrant, dog on the bite. At that point, I feel like my best option is now to go up. At least the suspect's busy with dog over here. I can gain control over here on this arm. You know, we can get some handcuffing going, and then I can get my dog off that so this guy doesn't start shooting me, which was a potential. Just didn't work out that way. But he had to restart the process 3 times, and we've seen that with other agencies. You can go to YouTube and see where dogs apprehend somebody, dog gets called back, suspect runs off, start the process again. It's out there enough.
And so I don't buy the, okay, so my issue with, hey, if he runs, great, I get to search for him again and we get to potentially bite him again. No, the most dangerous part of this search is when we're actively searching for the suspect. If he gets to run again and gain a tactical advantage, our dogs, again, they're leading us into an ambush. So we're creating this other dangerous situation now where he gets to, unsearched, take off running, decide where the confrontation is going to take place, and simply wait for us to come around the corner. And now he knows we're onto him. So I don't think it's that whole like, that's good, we get to chase him again. No, I think we're making it a lot more dangerous for ourselves.
Yep, and I think is what we're saying here is be open to other options. I wouldn't close your mind to verbal outing. We think it's important. And I wouldn't close your mind to going up and getting positive control. Neither one of those things are wrong. And with our experience and the amount of dogs and the amount of handlers we're dealing with, I think we're pretty confident in saying that going up and getting physical control of the suspect and the dog typically is the safest way. That also falls within the realm of what's legal.
Agreed.
Thanks for listening. In the meantime,
well, you know where to find us if you disagree. Let's have the conversation. We don't have to be enemies in this whole thing.
Absolutely.
Train hard
and be safe.